Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. And today, I actually wanted to talk about being ourselves versus being regulated because I think these two terms have uh, often uh, been misunderstood. And also, I think this topic is important because lately, I've been doing a lot of work around my own hidden shadows. And something has been, coming up for me again and again. It's that the more we work on ourselves, the more we realize that there are always more layers to discover. I actually lost my father last year, and I think that experience taught me something about self understanding that I hadn't fully appreciated before. I thought I had already done quite a lot of inner work. I thought I knew my shadows fairly well. I thought I understood many of my patterns and triggers. And then the grief came along and opened another Pandora's box, I would say. It brought up emotions, fears, vulnerabilities, and parts of myself that I hadn't necessarily encountered in the same way before. And it made me realize that perhaps we never really reach a point where we can say, I figured myself out. Because life continues to put us in situations that reveal something new about us. And that's why I've become increasingly interested in understanding myself rather than, constantly trying to understand everyone else. And if you're a spiritual person, there is, this idea that the world around us can act as a mirror, that what we experience in our relationships can sometimes reveal something about what is happening within us. You know, it's a beautiful saying, as within, so without. And I'm not saying that every person we encounter or every situation is simply a reflection of us, or that, we are responsible for how other people behave. But the way we respond to people, the things that trigger us, the patterns we repeatedly find ourselves in, those can actually tell us a lot about ourselves. Because we spend so much time trying to understand other people. Why did they behave that way? Why did they say that? Why don't they understand me? Why did they hurt me? Why aren't they changing? But just imagine what happens when we turn that attention inward and ask, what is happening inside me? What is being activated in me? What am I afraid of? What am I trying to avoid? What part of myself am I not comfortable looking at? And I'll tell you one question that has particularly stayed with me is asking myself, am I actually being myself in this situation or am I being dysregulated? And I think this is especially important because we often hear people say, I love being around this person because I can finally be myself. And sometimes that is a beautiful and healthy thing. But sometimes I think we use that idea to justify behaviors that we haven't actually learned to regulate. Why do we become more ourselves when we feel safe? Let's look at that. Okay. Think about the beginning of a relationship. When you first meet someone, let me have a sip of water first and then we'll continue. Okay. So think about it. When uh, you first meet someone, you're usually, quite conscious of how you behave. You think about how you communicate, how you respond to disagreements, how much space you give the other person, and how you treat their boundaries. But as the relationship develops, you become more comfortable. You begin to trust that this person isn't going anywhere. They aren't going to disappear just because you have had a bad day or because you've shown them an imperfect side of yourself. And it's a beautiful thing, a healthy relationship should allow you to, uh, healthy relationship should allow you to become more vulnerable. You should eventually be able to talk about your fears and your insecurities, your difficult experiences, your needs, and even the parts of yourself that you aren't particularly proud of. You should be able to show both your light and your shadow self. But there's an important distinction here. Revealing your shadow is not the same as acting out your shadow. You might discover that you have a lot of anger. Okay? Being able to tell your person, the person you feel safe with, being able to tell them, I have a lot of anger and I'm working on understanding it. It's very different from screaming at them and saying, this is just who I am, you should accept me. Take an example of jealousy. You might discover that you're a jealous person. Being a jealous person is not bad. Being able to admit, okay, I'm feeling jealous. I think there's an insecurity underneath this, trying to understand it. It's a very different response from using that jealousy to control the person, you know, controlling, who they talk to, where they go. And this is where I think the phrase, I can be myself around this person, needs a little more nuance. Yes, I want to be myself around the people I love, but I also want to be regulated enough to be myself responsibly. Comfort should allow us to reveal more of ourselves. It shouldn't become an excuse to abandon our responsibility for how we behave in society with other people. And try to understand, having a shadow doesn't make you a bad person. When we talk about shadow work, I think there's a tendency to misunderstand what the shadow actually represents. Okay, having a shadow doesn't mean there is something fundamentally wrong with you, because everybody has a shadow. Everybody not has a shadow, everybody has many shadows. We all have parts of ourselves that we like and parts that we find more difficult to accept. Everybody has, shadows of anger, fear, jealousy. There are many shadows. Maybe some people have more of those, some have less of those, maybe some people don't have it. But yes, every human being has a shadow, right? So it could be one shadow or many shadows. Okay. It can be anger, fear, jealousy, envy, shame, lust, the desire for power, the desire for attention, the need for validation, the fear of rejection, uh, the fear of being abandoned, and many other parts of our psychological experience that we may not always feel comfortable acknowledging. But these emotions and impulses often contain information.